that's an illegal order and I can't follow it and I won't. So rather than make the national news with it, because all of his men did the same thing, they come down and said, well, you're going to be rear detachment guard, because it was willing, they went to another unit, and another unit was more than happy to do it. Okay? So this is part of the problem with your military. We're not training our military proper either. Not like I got trained. I got trained to say no to illegal orders and to take whatever punishment comes, but don't break your oath. We're not teaching that in our military anymore. So be very careful. So he has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. And this is the conclusion. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Remember, they were going to the House of Commons, and they were trying to bring redress for their grievances against their government. And this is something that is guaranteed to them in the British Bill of Rights of 1689, right? But they didn't have any representation in the House of Commons or the House of Lords. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Boy, I think that very statement could fit today, wouldn't you say? Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity. My mouth doesn't say that word. Magnanimity. And we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's huge. That last sentence is huge. Do you think today that we would have anybody that would have the ability to pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors? We got people who won't even stand and say what's what because they're afraid they might get shunned from their social group. Right? We got people that can't show up for their local government. Oh, John, I'm just so busy. You know, I got church on Sunday morning and Sunday afternoon, and then Wednesday and Thursday, and then the kids have soccer on Monday, and then basketball practice on Tuesday, and then of course we've got all these things going on Friday, and you know, and then Saturday we've got so many things going on. We try to catch up on you know, the groceries and all that stuff. I couldn't possibly get involved with my government and make sure that it's not tyrannical. You kind of got your priorities screwed up, right? Because if you don't take care of your government and it becomes tyrannical, you don't have all those other things that you're wasting your time with. And yes, wasting your time with on most occasions. It's nothing more than social get-togethers. Without a free government, without a government under the control of the people, you will not have the freedom of religion. You will not have the freedom of assembly. You will not have the freedom of speech. And without those things, you don't have the freedom to come together for a volleyball game or a basketball game or all the other social things that you do. And at some point in time, when do you get involved? When it's too late? Remember Patrick Henry's speech? If we would have started a year earlier, where would we have been? Maybe we've waited too long. We've waited until the ships of war are showing up on our shores before we've decided to do anything. And yet the gentlemen of this congregation sit here saying peace, peace, and hoping for peace from a tyrant that they will not get it from. So when will you get involved? Are we able to pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honors? Do we even have people of honor enough that can do that? When the people who are taking the oaths in our government can't even abide by the oaths that they take. And we're not even asking them to give up their lives or their fortunes. But we do ask for their sacred honor, and we can't even get that. When we have people standing at the altar and giving a sacred oath, and divorce is the highest it's ever been. Do we really have people that have honor enough to hold their oath? Do we have people that have honor enough to give an oath? These are just crazy questions I think about in the dark, right? But I think they're important questions to think about. So the Declaration of Independence embodies the very principles of what our Constitution came together and codified. And I really, really encourage anyone to memorize that preamble. If you memorize that preamble, and the more you internalize that as you start studying both the letters from our founding fathers, the different arguments in Congress, the early Congress, you start reading the Federalist Papers, you start reading papers written by Hamilton, papers written by Jefferson, letters between Jefferson and Madison when they crushed the Central Church in Virginia. When you start reading these things and this principle is imprinted in your memory, you will get a far richer experience in studying your founding and your history and your documents. I promise you, you will. So, are there any questions, concerns, comments, criticisms? If not, next week, I believe, is what's on the curriculum for next week?
Crisis by Thomas Paine.
Crisis by Thomas Paine, you'll love that one. December 23rd, 1776. We just had a speaker the other night that came, and he quoted a certain part of that, and it's a powerful, powerful speech. It was on December 23rd, 1776. Anybody know what happened 24 hours after that? Painting of it, George Washington on the bow of a ship, on the bow of a boat. Anybody recognize that painting? What were they crossing? Where were they going? The Battle of Trenton. Right? The Battle of Trenton. Our soldiers were on the shore of the river. Most of them didn't have shoes. Most of them didn't have adequate clothing to be in the winter weather. Some of them, they couldn't light fires to stay warm because they were getting ready to cross the river and surprise the enemy in Trenton. A lot of them froze to death at the side of the river for your freedom. It's unbelievable what they went through to bring our freedom to us. Thomas Paine wrote that the men were naked in fact. In one of his articles, he was probably the first war correspondent, right? He wrote in one of his articles that the men were naked in fact. They were afraid that the Hessians would follow the bloody footprints in the snow back to their camp. Because in Valley Forge, they didn't have any food. The men had leather shoes, and they were cutting their shoes, the leather off their shoes and boiling it and eating it so that they would have something in their stomach to keep from freezing to death and have some form of nourishment. These are the type of men that stood up. These are the type of men that put themselves in harm's way. These are the type of men that we no longer have in this country. So when you disrespect liberty, when you take things for granted, think of the disrespect to those men that gave their lives and the inhumane conditions that they went through to fight for this country to be free and have liberty. It sickens me. But that's a very powerful speech, a very powerful writing. It talks about the summertime soldier in the sunshine, or the wintertime soldier and the sunshine patriot, right? And who will shrink from the duty to their country? Goes along with Mark Twain's poem, one of his poems that I really like, as he said, the patriot at the beginning of a contest is brave and scorned and hated. But when he's successful, the timid want to join him, for then it costs nothing to be a patriot. And that's exactly what Thomas Paine was talking about. There was a lot of people that wouldn't join in because the times were tough. They didn't have money, they didn't have food, they didn't have clothing. But the men that answered the call, the men that stayed there, the men that froze to death, the men that fought, the men that crossed the Delaware, he said those are the ones that deserve the love of every man and woman, because they are the ones that secured liberty. The sunshine patriot doesn't deserve anything. Remember, Benjamin Franklin said, anyone that's willing to give up essential liberty for security deserves neither, and soon will have neither. So I love it when I talk to these people and they go, well, you got to understand, John, you got to pick your battles. Every coward I ever met said that. If you're living by principles, your battles pick you. You don't have the choice. So don't tell me how you're living by principle if you're picking your battles. Because if you're picking your battles, you're not living by principle. If you're living by principle, your battles will pick you. You don't have a choice. So that'll be a good one next week. Go ahead.
I got a question. What era do you think, or time frame do you believe that we kind of really lost it as far as control in this country?
Well, you ever heard the slow boiling of the frog? Human nature has a way of doing that. And the prince and power of the earth, the prince of darkness, has a way of doing that because he's timeless, right? So he can do it over generations where we get fat and happy and comfortable and stop fighting. And it started about in the 1850s is where we started to really start to slip away. Again, in 1808, when we didn't end slavery, and the love of money, which is the root of all evil, took hold of some of those extremely rich people in the South, and they went to their own religion to justify why one man should own another, and completely bastardized the Word of God. That's part of it. That's part of the sinful nature of man. That was, we did some bad things there. Coming up into 1850, when we started getting the German atheistic ideology from Johns Hopkins University that came to the United States and started to bring in this idea of progressivism, which at its very base is communism. And that started with the Johns Hopkins University, and then that started coming up through until we probably about 1870s when we started seeing that. And then that started taking a foothold in America. And then 1913 with Woodrow Wilson, who claimed to be a Democrat but was actually a progressive. And then, of course, you had Teddy Roosevelt that claimed to be a Republican but was an actual progressive. Okay? He started the Bull Moose Party, which was a progressive party, didn't win, so he became a Republican. Who'd have thought it, right? Got the same problem in Hillsdale. All these Democrats couldn't win, so they became Republicans. Who'd have thought it? So we had this slow boiling of the frog, this giving up. The 17th Amendment was horrible. It took us halfway into a direct democracy. And now you've got people looking to be, in Michigan, we had Republicans that actually backed the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact Bill, which blew me away. And now that we're democratically controlled now in Michigan, they're introducing those bills for real that'll probably go up to Whitmer to be signed. We're in very dangerous times, but this happened very slowly. One of the problems is we had the greatest generation went to Europe to fight for freedom for those people, came back and stopped fighting. It's amazing how you can make people stop fighting when you've got the white picket fence, the 2.3 kids, the dog, the great job, summer vacations, and all the toys you could ever want, right? The more comfortable we become, the less we pay attention to our liberty and what's happening. The more it's good to become a dependent and be safe. Now, liberty's not safe. It's dangerous. But I prefer it over the shackles of dependency.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
It happens so slowly, like he said, over so many generations, and you're all so busy. Unless you can learn from history and step back and look at the big picture, these points in history, it's hard to understand, I think, what really happened.
In the early 20th century, we had one parent that went to work and another parent that stayed home and did a lot of the things like raise the children, raise the family, right? And we started to take our offspring and turn them into carbon copies of ourselves, which is what we're supposed to do with our own principles and mores and norms. But it used to be extended families, right? So you had children, you raised them, you took care of your parents, the grandparents. The grandparents had a lot to do with talking to the children and spreading that family history and spreading history, the real history. And then we were always raised by extended family, but then we got into the 20th century and things got a little bit wilder, right? We had a central bank that could now take half of the people's money in income tax, right? And then we had World War II, you know, Rosie the Riveter. Yeah, let's get the women in the workforce because then we can steal from 100% of the people. Well, if mom and dad are in the workforce and we're not taking care of the parents, the grandparents at home anymore, no longer the extended family, who's raising the children? Well, the schools, the state will raise the children for you, right? And so now we're even farther. Now it's the state and the internet that raises your children. And we can't figure out what went wrong. I got a clue. When you find things that don't work, you don't keep trying something new. You go back to what worked. We just have an inability to remember what did work and go back to it. Because we've gotten so far away from our history.
My mom used to say it was her generation that quit disciplining, but I'm not sure it was then. But I can tell you, my class, and I graduated in '65, so I'm probably the oldest one here. But a lot of my classmates quit spanking their children.
Sure.
And then a short time after that, then they started wanting to be friends with their kids instead of parents to their children.
That's socialism.
And it's just,
And then,
I've watched it happen.
yeah, but it's happened very slowly, right? Here's the
Yes,
thing.
very
Thomas Paine said Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp to guide my feet, and that's the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past, right? Okay, well, you think about it. We always do what we're used to doing. In our history, for some reason, we always think that that's the way it's always been, because that's our history, right? If we'd have grown up in 1790s and 1800s, the beginning of the 1800s, you wouldn't see big Christmas celebrations, right? You wouldn't see a tree and all this gift giving. But my generation, we grew up with the J.C. Penney catalog, and that's always been Christmas, right? Very commercialized. Well, it wasn't always like that, was it? We don't even teach that in the church, that it hasn't always been like that. So my generation thinks that that's normal Christmas, that that's the way it is. Why? Because that's the lamp of our experience. Why? Because nobody has brightened our lamp enough to teach us the whole history coming up through, so that we completely understand and have a much brighter lamp to guide our footsteps. We have barely a match lit in our lamp. And that's by design. Because if people know the history, then you can identify when things are going wrong. We don't want people to know the history. No different than the reason why the plantation owners didn't want the slaves to be able to learn to read. Because if they could read and think, it's pretty tough to keep them as slaves. Well, if you can keep the children from knowing their history, it makes them much easier to enslave them, doesn't it? And when you can limit their experience, and as each generation has a different experience, thinking, oh, that's the experience, our lamp to guide our footsteps gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. So we go to 501c3 churches to have somebody tell us what to believe. We go to school to have somebody, a state-sponsored school, to have somebody tell us what we should think. And we watch mainstream media news to have somebody tell us what to feel. We have completely gone DFNU. That's dead from the neck up. We no longer have critical thinking skills. That's what I attribute it to. So it didn't happen at any one point, but we saw a quickening. So we started seeing it 1870 as it come up to the beginning of the 20th century, And then we saw a spurt where we got closer into direct democracy and socialism. And that came up through, and then in the 30s we saw a little bit bigger push. And then coming up after World War II, it became kind of a steady push until the late 60s, early 70s. Then we saw this huge quickening, this very quick quickening that's starting to push us towards communism, right? Remember, liberty is freedom coupled with morality. What did the hippie generation want? Freedom! Okay, so you didn't want the morality. No. Look at Woodstock, right? If it feels good, do it. We didn't want any responsibility. Well, with rights come responsibilities. And if you want liberty, you have to have morality with freedom. Well, they didn't want the morality and they didn't want the responsibility. We wanted freedom and rights. And these are the people now that are they're the captains of your industry and in your government. The same people that wanted freedom and rights, but forgot all about the morality and responsibility. That's why we've seen such a quickening. And why? Do you remember them ever teaching in the 60s that liberty was freedom coupled with morality? No, we'd run that person out on a rail. Oh, they're an old fogey. Or that rights come with responsibilities, right? That's what the feminist movement was all about in the 70s, right? We want equal pay, we want equal rights. Well, do you want to carry 140 pounds on your back for 12 miles every quarter and do it under 3 hours so that you can keep the infantry designation? No. Well, so you want the right, but you don't want the responsibility. That's what that was all about. That's what feminism in the 70s was all about. They wanted the rights, but no responsibility to go with it. It's not how it works. That doesn't even happen with the men. You want to be in the infantry, if you can't do certain things, sorry, you're not here. You can't be in the infantry. Now, does that make them bad people? No. If you can't handle the heat, don't be a baker. Everybody's got certain skills. And there's skills for everybody in every walk of life, everywhere to go. Just because you want to be something doesn't mean you should be, right? Look how many police officers we have that probably shouldn't have a badge or a gun. But we allow them to be, right? Because we're into this whole thing of, well, we've got to let anybody be anything that they want to be. Everybody gets a trophy. It doesn't work like that. With rights come responsibilities. You can't have liberty without freedom and morality. Don't forget what John Adams said. He said our Constitution is designed for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate for any other. So what have we been trying to do over the last 100 years? We've been trying to destroy morality. We've been trying to destroy the family. We've been trying to destroy the middle class. You getting a clue now why? Because once they destroy those things, our Constitution isn't worth the paper it's written on.